I am autistic. I was diagnosed at the age of 12. As many people have pointed out my entire life, you probably couldn't tell. I am confident and social on social media. I talk to people whenever I'm outside. I smile at strangers. I'm able to produce sarcasm and make jokes, though I don't always recognize it when other people do it. I went to university and graduated. I've published books. I've created over 100 YouTube videos. I can morph myself in such a way that allows me to pass as neurotypical. The thing is, and what we've all been trying to say these past few years and to make the world aware of, is that no one autistic person looks the same as another autistic. Albert Einstein, one of the greatest mathematicians and scientists the world has ever known, was socially awkward and known to have been introverted and reclusive. He was obsessed with physics. As a child, he had delayed speech development, which is now known as and referred to as Einstein syndrome. However, later in life, when he finally did learn to speak, he spoke eloquently. He had a need for structure and routine. He had visual and spatial thinking. He was direct and blunt when he spoke, had sensory issues and obsessed over little details. He struggled to express his empathy in a way that others understood. Beethoven, the musical mastermind, just like Einstein, he was also socially awkward and reclusive. He spent almost all of his time absolutely obsessed with music. He held rigid routines and habits, oftentimes exhibiting such precision in his routines that he would count 60 coffee beans every morning for his coffee. He was known for being emotionally intense, which led to dramatic mood swings. He had difficulty in communicating and expressing himself. His dependence on written communication, mirroring the way in which most autistics feel more comfortable communicating and expressing themselves in written words rather than speech. He held a strong sense of justice and held an unshaking resistance to authority. He had difficulties in reading social cues, and he struggled with day-to-day life affairs such as finance and household needs. Emily Dickinson, the American author and poet from the 1800s, like the rest, she preferred solitude and reclusiveness over social events and interactions. She held an intense hyper-focus on writing, producing nearly 1,800 poems in her lifetime. Dickinson was highly sensitive to sensory stimuli in her environment. For instance, she was particular about her clothing and famously wore only white in her later years. She had a unique communication style and an unconventional use of language that not only made her neurodivergency apparent, but also set her work aside from the rest of her peers at that time. She was also known to have been emotionally intent, as well as having a hyper-awareness of mortality, which many autistics experience. She had strict routines and required consistency in her day-to-day life. She had difficulty in maintaining close relationships, had an intense connection to nature, and was direct in her communication and experienced literal interpretations in social and written settings. Autism is a spectrum. We've spoken about this so many times. No one autistic will show up the same as another autistic individual. We all hold similar difficulties, but have different needs. We don't all have the same level of characteristics, and thus many will appear different to the world in contrast to other autistics. But unfortunately, one thing that we all struggle with and face on a daily basis is not our own struggles, but the way in which we are perceived and treated by the world. Stereotypes and stigmatization, social exclusion and isolation, judgment of competence and misinterpretation of our behavior, scrutinizing and policing of our behavior to the extent what we are forced to mask, conform, and blend in, all which cause physical and mental health issues, by the way. Underestimation of emotions and our need to socialize, workplace and educational discrimination, invalidation of self-advocacy, pathologizing normal differences, in other words, viewing autism as a problem, or worse, a fucking tragedy, because God forbid someone experience the world differently than the normies. Infantilization, which in simple terms means treating autistic adults like children or helicopter parenting. Gaslighting or questioning of our experienced reality. Unreasonable expectations of social conformity, like forcing us to hold eye contact despite it causing deep discomfort. Punitive responses to meltdowns and shutdowns, which we cannot help. Denial of personal identity and expression. We say we are autistic because it is a part of us and affects our processing and experiencing of the world around us, making it a huge part of who we are. But due to the fact that it makes so many people uncomfortable to perceive people as different, and neurotypicals struggling with the ridiculous belief that disability is ugly, less than, or unnatural, you persist on holding and forcing your view that it's person with autism, like it's a handbag that I can just put down as soon as I get home, or a cold that I can just pop some pills for. Failure to respect our boundaries, as many assume that we are just being too sensitive. Lack of recognition for our strengths. The way autism is fantasized in media. There's the autistic savant, autism as a superpower. There's the lovable oddball. There's the innocent or childlike perspective, which, by the way, makes creepy people fantasize about us in very different ways. There's the tragic burden. And then there's the heroic overcomer. And lastly, name me one autistic that you know that has not faced bullying all the way into their later years. Oh wait. One thing I know that we can all agree with, every human, is that life is hard. But facing a world that is consistently trying to push you down, gaslight you, stereotype you, scrutinize you, exclude and isolate you for seeing and experiencing the world differently than the majority, makes it 1,000 times more challenging, demanding, and exhausting. We are expected to be dumb enough and incapable enough to be perceived, and yet genius enough and talented enough to be what? Fucking superhuman, as well as needing to dull ourselves down and modify ourselves so that those around us don't feel uncomfortable. Research from Sweden's Karolinska Institute found that individuals with autism spectrum disorder had an average life expectancy of 54 years, compared to approximately 70 years in the general population. Those with ASD who also had intellectual disabilities had somewhat better outcomes than those without intellectual disabilities, often due to greater social and healthcare support. But this is not due to some hidden health condition that we neurodivergents hold. No. Mental health issues, including anxiety, depression, and obsessive-compulsive disorder, are more common among autistic individuals. Studies show that 40 to 70% of autistic people experience some form of mental health challenge, which can lead to heightened suicide risk. Autistic individuals are at a notably higher risk of suicide than the general population. A study by the Autism Research Centre at the University of Cambridge indicated that adults with autism are nearly 9 times more likely to die by suicide. Another study found that around 10% of autistic individuals had already attempted. And the contributing factors? Please refer to previously listed points made earlier. We neurodivergents really do not ask for much. Just understanding, accommodation, and patience.